The attack on masculinity and testosterone has its roots in the communist Marxist ideology, going all the way back to Karl Marx, who is the father of the Marxist ideology, extending also to Mao Zedong of China and also to Stalin of the former Soviet Union. The reason why this happens is because in order to take over a nation with little to no fight, you must take testosterone and masculinity out of the equation. That is the only way that a government coming in, especially a communist Marxist government, can take control over a nation, is to remove the will to fight from men. The reason for my video today is to present this evidence to you that I mentioned in the former about how our political system here in the United States is being hijacked by people who are trying to take over here in the United States and also in the West altogether. Europe is also dealing with the same situation. Theirs is just a little bit different. So if you have not liked and subscribed and shared, please do so now, and let's get into this. So today, just like I said in the introduction, I will be giving evidence and information on how communism and Marxism is directly linked to the attack on masculinity here in the United States. As you know, this is a men's channel. This is the reason why I'm speaking about this. It plays into what is happening in our schools today and also with men in the workplace and the dating scene as well. So in order to get into this, I can't even get into the entire conversation until I explain who these people are and what has happened in the past. So the first one I'm going to be going over today is Mao Zedong, also known as Chairman Mao. And he led China from 1949 to 1976. Mao used egalitarian masculinity to create a revolution, which in turn created a bitter hatred for men and masculinity among women. He told peasants to blame the people in masculine positions of power for their social and economic woes, and paraded the theory that men and women are no different. This creates many different problems. So as we look at the United States today, we can see that the same thing is happening today. It's just been repackaged. The way it's been repackaged is that masculinity is being seen as something toxic, no matter what form it comes in, as far as politics go today. Because of that, women are being told that any type of masculine position can either be run by a woman or that any man in a masculine position is evil, which is why there is a demonization against police officers, firefighters, EMTs, and things like that. In some cases, what is happening is that they are trying to pit those two against each other. Mao used the exact same tactics when trying to get the peasants to go against people that were in a higher economical position as far as jobs go, business, farmers, things like that. So what we see today correlates with what happened during Mao Zedong's rule in China. I believe that it is a communist Marxist ideology, and it matches up perfectly with that, which is why masculinity is under attack. The only way that a government, like I said in the intro, can take over a nation is if you quell the issue of masculinity or men doing any type of revolt. In Mao's situation, because I know there'll probably be people in the comments that'll talk about it, Mao's situation was a little different because what he was doing was he was using masculinity to take power. Then once he got into power, he was telling the peasants and the lower caste in China to blame all of their woes and socioeconomic woes on the people who were in higher positions of power that had more money. So to equate that to how we live today, it would be like taking someone from a poor neighborhood and telling them, hey, the whole reason why you are in this position and you live in this poor neighborhood is because that guy over there that drives a Mercedes and is a doctor is taking all the money away from you, and he's the one robbing your pockets. You're just not seeing it. That would be the equivalent of what Mao was doing in his own country to his own people. So it was basically making a caste system, but then causing a rift between those two systems, even down to the point of there were stories where a family members, right? People inside the family, maybe one family member doesn't have a lot of money and they're considered peasants. And then the other side of the family maybe is a doctor or a lawyer. they were making the peasants go after that doctor or lawyer in the same family. So you had people who were being tortured and killed, and the family that was the peasant was actually playing a part in them being killed and just saying, I don't care because they're evil because they took everything from me. You see the same footprint and the same fingerprint in what is happening today in the United States that Mao was doing over there. Communism and Marxism, they change constantly between different governments around the world because different governments, they have a different way of saying their names and party systems, right? So here, liberals here in the United States tend to be the leftists, and Republicans here tend to be the people on the right. If you go over to Europe, that is totally flipped the other way around, right? So I understand that there are some differences and it can morph and things like that. But at the core of what Marxism is and at the core of what communism is still the same thing. It has gotten repackaged and represented to different countries and different situations, but that doesn't mean that they're not after the same goal. It's still the subjugation of the people, right? It's still the emasculation of the society. That's what it is going to come down to. That's the end goal. And the reason why that is always the end goal is because removing masculinity out of a civilization or out of a nation will stop a revolution. Anytime you look back in history, going all the way back to the Germanic tribes in Germania and going back to all of these other civilizations where there have been revolts, the French Revolution, things like that, has always been men who typically are the ones who revolt. So if somebody's coming into power and they're wanting to take complete and total power over a nation, they're either going to do one of two things that would make sense. They're either going to use that masculinity to their advantage to create that revolution to gain power, or they're going to gain power on their own with their own army, and then they are going to subjugate the masculinity within the population so that they can continue doing what they're doing and roll over the population. This has not changed. It's happened under Stalin, it's happened under Pol Pot, it's happened under Mao Zedong, and it's happening now here in the United States. So Marxists believe that gender norms and behaviors are socially constructed, not biologically determined. So I'm going to pause right there for a second. And if you look at what is happening here, that's exactly what you hear from colleges and places where there is a lot of leftist ideology, is that gender is not biological, it's social. Right? This is why you hear people say they, them, and go through all the different, gender names and stuff like that, because the ideology is Marxism, it's cultural Marxism, and they do not believe that your biology determines your gender or your sex, right? Or I'm sorry, the way that they word it is that it doesn't determine your gender. Your sex is just what you are, but your gender is socially constructed. Basically, you could be whatever you want. You could be an attack Apache helicopter if you want to. We've heard those kinds of crazy things before. So you see this exact same thing happening here in the United States. Karl Marx suggested that androgyny would create equality, meaning that androgyny, if nobody knows what that means to basically remove the private parts, right? Androgyny would make everyone equal, which is to me a insane ideology. We are not all equal. Men are different than women. Men have their role in society and women have their role in society. Men and women have their own roles. And the reason why is because they complement each other. Women usually tend to be the caretakers. They tend to be the ones that, take care of the children and things like that, right? They're meant for those positions, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a respectable position. On the other side of that, you have the men who are the ones who go to war, handle the hard politics that might not be as easy for a woman to handle. They're trying to wash them out and say that everybody is the same, which is exactly the ideology of Marxism and communism. So, and this is why you see a lot of men turning to be effeminate and not wanting to embrace masculinity. And you see they've come out in droves now and said things like going to the gym is a Nazi ideology, just to go to the gym and work out and take care of yourself, to have big muscles and to assert yourself, things like that, and be a hard worker. Those things are all a Nazi right wing, they're a bad thing, is what they're trying to do, paint it as a bad thing. And that the effeminate men who are more in touch with their emotions and they cry about everything and they can't handle anything, those guys are the good guys. So we're the bad guys and those are the good guys. And so what that does is it's kind of like how the whole mouse thing, where a mouse does something and you give it a piece of cheese, it's going to continue that same action over and over again to get that piece of cheese. That's what's happening in society. You tell these effeminate men that they're good and they're going to continue that same behavior and that same role. While as you're telling the other guys that they are bad because of what they're doing, we're probably a little bit more on the side of, we don't really care. We're going to continue doing it because we know that what we're doing is right. So these things are happening because we're basically being taken over slowly. And in order for it to be easier for them to do that, they're going to continue pushing that on feminine men, right? Trying to get them to stay feminine. And that goes back to the whole Marxist thing of equality. If you can get men to be more effeminate and you can get women to be more masculine, it's going to start getting them to an equality thing, as they would call it in Marxism, right? And that's what they want. They want that equality, because once you get that equality out of all of them, now it's easier to control them, because you don't have any root of what a man is supposed to be, and a woman doesn't have any root of what a woman is supposed to be. You can look at society now with the way that women just do not care about themselves. They don't care about their bodies. They just throw themselves out there and do whatever, on the internet in front of a camera, and men are essentially rooting it on and paying them for it. As I promised in the intro, I would also be talking about Stalin. So each of these situations is different, but still contains the same core of Marxism. So the part I wanted to talk about today with Stalin during the Soviet Union is the Stalin's purges. So I'm going to kind of give an overview of who he was and what his beliefs were. And then from there, I will go into the part about the whole masculinity and that being under attack during Stalin's reign. So there's a thing called Stalin's purges. After the death of Vladimir Lenin in 1924, a power struggle ensued within the ruling Communist Party, and Joseph Stalin, who lived from 1878 to 1953, eventually came out on top. He governed the Soviet Union from 1924 until his death, through his positions as General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in 1922 to 1952, and Chairman of the Council of Ministers of the Soviet Union in 1941 to 1953. Even though Stalin initially governed the Soviet Union as a part of a collective leadership, he quickly consolidated power into his own hands, and by the 1930s, he was the determining factor or dictator of the USSR. The type of regime formalized and adhered to by Stalin became known as Stalinism, which was, for anybody who doesn't know, a mix of Marxism and Stalinism and also communism. Very weird mixture. And had a strong emphasis on rapid industrialization, collectivization of agriculture, the political theory of socialism in one country, and the subordination, always has to do with subordination or subjugation of the interests of foreign communist parties to those of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Stalin established a one-party totalitarian police state and built a cult of personality. So a couple of things inside of that are important is the cult of personality, and also the subordination or subjugation of either the people inside of the party, inside of the Communist Party in Russia, or the people as a whole in Russia. Then we get into gender selection. The Stalinist purges targeting wider society targeted both men and women, but some specific events that took place within this context were clearly gender selective. As we've seen in many other parts of the world and epochs of history, adult men were considered more of a threat. Again, going back to masculinity, testosterone, things like that. They know that if they do not subjugate the males of the population, that they're going to be a problem. Why? Why is that? Because like I said earlier, men are the ones who usually start the revolutions. Now, either you're going to have inside of Marxism a subjugation of masculinity, or you're going to have it where they will allow a certain type of masculinity. It's still very controlled, right? We see Marxism take a different form because it can kind of move from one form to another, but it's still the basic core part of that, which is a odd gender equality, where masculinity is either not allowed or masculinity is only allowed, but only in the circumstances that that government is allowing, or the ruling government at the time. As we see in many other parts of the world and epochs of history, adult men were considered more of a threat, which made them a more probable target for certain types of attacks. According to some reports, entire groups of men were taken in one swoop by the NKVD. Almost all the male inhabitants of the little Greek community where I lived in the lower Ukraine had been arrested, recalled one immigrant. Another reported that the NKVD took all males between the ages of 17 and 70 from his village of German Russians. Now, it's important to remember that most of them were put into labor camps where they had to work, and most of them died from either disease or being worked to death. Now, adult women, I think this is important too. When a person had been arrested, relatives of that person could be arrested and punished under the counterterrorism legislation, including wives and children aged 12 or more. So it wasn't just men who were under attack, but it was also women as well. However, men were the first on the chopping block. Why is that? Because when you are trying to take power in a country, just like I was talking about with the Mao thing, it's the quicker that you can get power over the men in that society, the quicker you can take power and do what you need to do. And usually you're going to have a situation where they're going to say either you join us and you help us, or we take you to this camp over here and we take your family as well. Most men will roll over because it's their family. Who wouldn't, right? So nowadays, taking this from a historical context to a modern context, the way that it's happening now today is still Marxism, but it is morphed into a different type of Marxism. And this Marxism we have now is a complete and utter demonization of men and anything that is masculine, denying our own makeup and who we are as men, right? Our biology, what makes us who we are, the want and will to do things like lifting weights and carrying a gun and protecting ourselves, protecting our family, working hard, not really taking shit from anybody, standing up for ourselves, having positions of power like police and working in government and things like that, are all being demonized and told that men should not hold these positions of power, because if they do, that means that they can use it to only do evil, and that's it. So women should be put into those positions of power instead of men. And we see anytime that happens, most of the time in government, if you look over in Europe right now, we're having an issue where women are the leaders over there in Europe. There's a lot of women leaders over there in Europe, and those places are absolutely falling apart. Nothing there is being done correctly. The mass immigration into those countries is an absolute disaster and a mess. These women are not standing up for what they should be standing up for. So that's a different video. I'm not going to go off on a tangent. However, going back to the Stalin thing, I guess my overview of this, just to give a little small overview of everything, is that Marxism started with Karl Marx, and different people have taken that into their own account and kind of morphed it into whatever worked for them at the time. So, and Stalin is no different than any of the other ones that did that, Pol Pot, Mao Zedong. And it's important to remember that they had their own weird idea of what Marxism was, but it still held the same, that either masculinity was not allowed or masculinity was only allowed to get what they needed done. And it was usually a twisted form of masculinity. And 9 times out of 10, it actually oppressed women on the other end, and also oppressed real actual masculinity, because the masculinity that was introduced underneath Stalin ended up being kind of a weird conglomeration of almost like an abusive masculinity, where it was very oppressive and very overdone, right? Using it to subjugate the rest of the population, especially the women as well. So if you didn't go along with it, then you were demonized. So the old way that Russia was, the traditional days of Russia, Stalin actually rejected that and didn't want anything to do with that anymore. So he rejected the way that Russia used to be, where there might have been just a little bit of gender equality there, and women may have been allowed to work. It was not oppressive. It was just normal masculinity, right? When he came in, he rejected all that, took masculinity and inflated it and made it into a very oppressive system, right? So masculinity is not allowed in the way that you want it when it comes to Marxism, only the way that the state and the government wants it. So it should be noted that some specific labor camps for certain eras had a very high death toll that much exceeded the average. In the late 1930s, some especially horrifying camps in the Kolymya gold mining region had a survival rate of just 2 to 3%. Kolymya is located in the Arctic part of the Russian Far East, just south of the East Siberian Sea in the Arctic Ocean. The average winter in Kolymya lasts for up to 6 months, with the average winter temperatures ranging from -19 to -38 degrees Celsius, which would be almost 60 degrees below zero, if I'm not mistaken, between 50 and 60 degrees below zero. As mentioned above, Stalin launched a series of purges where the aim was to solidify his power and clean the Communist Party and the governmental organizations and institutions opposition against him. Again, trying to clear out everything that had to do with traditional masculinity or traditional roles in Russia, trying to get rid of all of those things and introduce a Marxist government, Marxist communist government. Some people will call it Marxist-Stalinist, which I think I had said earlier in the video. Now, Stalinism meant something else, a particular way to organize the exploitation and oppression of the working class, with a one-party state in total control of the economic system, ruling through a combination of terroristic intimidation and Marxist ideology. Again, that goes back to what I was talking about with the men in the country, right? When Stalin took power, it was hey, either you're going to play the role that we want you to and use the masculinity in the way that we need you to use it, or you go to these camps over here and your family goes with you. And that's exactly what they're talking about with terroristic intimidation. Some of that even meant taking the family members from the home and hurting them and doing things to them until the men would roll over and join and help with whatever they needed. Almost kind of like it was with the revolution with Mao Zedong, where he was employing men who were impoverished to join his revolution against the other part of the population, which would have been the healthy masculine men who were working in business and farms and things like that, right? So again, pitting people against each other and using terroristic intimidation to get what you want. And it meant that the ideology those rulers promoted, which was spread throughout the world by communist parties, finally it came to mean the tactics and methods of those communist parties outside Russia, which were converted from revolutionary worker parties into bureaucratized shells, even when they retained large working class followings inspired by illusions that socialism existed in Russia. Again, we're dealing with the same thing that Mao did, where on the outside, he tried to make it look like this is socialism and this is great. You know, this is what we've always been doing, but this is like a new thing that we're trying to do that is going to be better than the last thing, right? It always goes that way. They take the old traditional roles and lie about it, and then they twist it into something else. And it still has to do with the subjugation of men first being on the list, because if you can't get the men to subjugate, you cannot take power in a nation. I don't care where you go. It's not going to happen because the men are going to revolt. So there has to be a subjugation of the men and masculinity in that country. And that can be done in one of two ways. It can be done through the terroristic threats like what we see in here, or that can also be done by demonizing masculinity altogether. So if you look at Stalinism and Maoism, that masculinity was used to gain power and start a revolution. Here in the United States, nowadays, you're seeing the demonization of masculinity, which is the same outcome. It's going to be the same outcome. It's still the subjugation of the men in the country. They do this through our food. They do this through the media. They do this through social media. They do this through movies. They do this through the schools, pushing LGBTQ and telling little boys that this is the correct way that they should be. This Marxism thing is the tool bag. And inside of this tool bag are all the different tools that they use to attack not only our boys when they're young, but also us men too, through labor, through jobs, through the way that our women treat men. All of it is a tool inside of this Marxism bag. So this is going to be episode 1. This is a two-part episode. Obviously, the first part of this was about Mao Zedong, and the second part, was about Stalin. The next one that I'm going to do is probably going to be Pol Pot and one other person. I'm not sure. I don't want to name them yet, but they will be in the next episode. That will be episode 2, and that will be dropping next week on Saturday around the same time as this one. I meant to get this out at 6 p.m. today. I got 3 kids, so things were a little busy. So I apologize for the delay. This is going to drop probably at 7:30. So if you are watching this and you like what I'm talking about on this channel when it comes to masculinity and men in the United States and also in the West, please like, share, and subscribe. Share this with as many friends as you can. That helps with the algorithm. It helps to get things moving. I hope that you like the channel. Welcome to the Codios tribe. Like, share, and subscribe. You have a good one.